Rob's taking a pregame sip.
Sorry.
No, we didn't start yet. Go ahead. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Reserved Seating. I'm Adam.
I'm Rob.
I'm Rosalie. I'm not normally on this.
Why did we suddenly decide we were doing that?
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Reserved Seating. We're going to be doing another Mailbag episode. Joined, as always, is my wonderful co-host, Rob, and a special guest this week, Rosalie Lewis from F This Movie, of course. So, hi, Rosalie. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
It's a thrill.
Yeah. So we have 6 questions this time. So to everybody who submitted a question, thank you. We appreciate it. So we're going to start with Miko, our favorite.
Hello, Miko.
Hi, Miko.
Who asked favorite non-Star Trek Shatner movies. And this one humbled me a bit because I had always assumed that I had seen Shatner in a ton of non-Star Trek movies. And maybe I conflated that with his television work because I've seen like the Twilight Zone episodes he's been on and so forth. But I had a much smaller list to pick from. But I'll go last. Rosalie, what did you think?
Well, I was even more humbled because I looked at the movies of his that I had seen, and I actually haven't seen the Star Trek movies he's in. Which
like any Star Trek movie or just the Shatner ones?
Well, I saw the ones that have Chris Pine.
Okay, makes sense.
So, don't hate me. But I've seen a couple William Shatner movies, but I don't know that they count as William Shatner movies. So I saw Over the Hedge, which he is a voice in. I've seen Miss Congeniality, which I think he plays a character, but I could be wrong. It might just be him playing himself.
The real trick with Shatner in the last 30 years is he playing William Shatner in the movie?
Sure. So I actually attempted to watch another William Shatner movie. No question was going to be asked. And I must admit that it wasn't the best choice of movie that I did. So I went with The Kidnapping of a U.S. President, which is a Canadian movie from 1980 or 81. And he plays like the head of the Secret Service. And Hal Holbrook is the president, and he spends a lot of time inside of an armored truck. And it should be really cool on paper, and I was really excited about it, but there's like no suspense, and you don't really get any character background. And so, yeah, it was a little bit of a letdown. So I'm sure he's done a lot of really good movies, but my answer is Boston Legal, because that's not a movie, but that's what I got to know him in the best, and I really love his character in that show. So
I'm even more humbled, Rosalie, and I just want to send out my apologies to Miko because one, he does play a named character in Miss Congeniality named Stan Fields.
Okay.
2, aside from the aforementioned Twilight Zone, which Adam referenced, I'm realizing that my other key reference point for William Shatner outside of Star Trek is playing the big giant head on Third Rock from the Sun.
Oh yeah, that's right. Well, that's a good reference. I like
That's
it.
basically all I got, except for Fanboys. When he delivers my favorite line in Fanboys, I'm William Shatner, I can score anything.
I'm William Shatner, I can score anything.
I'll throw out 2 more. One is he's playing a fictional character. He's not the best part of the movie, but he's good enough. It's he's the comedic villain in National Lampoon's Loaded Weapon 1.
Wow.
Okay.
He also was in The Devil's Reign, which I watched because it was John Travolta's first movie. So when I was watching all the John Travolta movies, I caught up with that one. And it's like a pretty creepy 70s occult movie. It's not great, but there's some really kind of freaky imagery, and the pacing of it is real odd. So it works kind of as a mood piece. So I would say, and he's a lead character in that. So I would say like that's probably the best Shatner quote unquote movie, like vehicle that I've seen him in.
I mean, Homeboy just did so much TV. I mean, there's just so much TV. He did anything Star Trek adjacent. any like Star Trek video game, anything that looked vaguely like Star Trek, he was there, and it was him, and he was doing it. And I say that with all due respect. We love William Shatner.
Yes. Did either of you hear his quote after he actually went into space? He went on one of those like commercial charter.
Right. I remember
like,
that.
Yeah, I forgot what the exact quote was, but in a nutshell, it was basically like he expected to be like really invigorated by going into space, and that it was so like cold and dark and desolate, it just made him feel so alone, and that he realized it's kind of like the end of Ad Astra, where like all we've got is what we have down here.
Wow.
Yeah, and coming
That's
from
dark.
William Shatner, that was like, we should just not give NASA any more money.
That's
Right.
that's dark, Bill.
So we'll move to the next question. Movie Hero on Twitter. What is your opinion on current run times? It seems like 2 and 2.5 hours is the norm these days, while 90-minute movies like 65 are so much more rare. Anyone feeling running time fatigue when considering new movies to watch?
You know, it depends. My thing always with this is it depends on the movie. If a movie needs to be 2.5 hours, let it be 2.5 hours. If there's 2.5 hours worth of story to tell and it needs to be that long, be that long. If a movie needs to be 3.5 hours, then it's 3.5 hours. If a movie doesn't, let's not do it just because, you know, we need to sort of amortize and we need to kind of optimize the viability for streaming services and all the things. You know, it used to be movies had to be shorter. I was just doing a chapter out of the Sidney Lumet book with my film students, and he was talking about how, you know, with exhibition, where it's like you need to do, you know, X amount of shows a day. Movies used to be like, no, 2 hours is absolutely as long as it needs to be because we're gonna get 16 showings of this in a day. Now it's like everything is just, there's just so much more space because so much of it is done with streaming in mind, where it's like, well, we need to keep people on the streaming service for as long as possible. And I do think many mainstream films are bloated. I also do think that just the popularity of bigger sci-fi hero fantasy epics, you know, them being the more viable box office draw makes it so that those movies, that most mainstream movies now tend to be longer. I definitely don't want to be a curmudgeon about it and say the movies need to be shorter, because I do think that demanding that everything be 90 minutes is just as bad, because there are things that are too short and could go a little longer and have a little bit more breathing room. So at the end of the day, it depends on the project. And I think it takes smart people to know what a movie needs to be. And I think that we just probably right now are seeing a glut of longer movies because of what movies are viable in the box office right now. We don't have the $30 million mid-budget comedy anymore. You know what I mean? We don't have the Sandler movies and the Farley movies, and we don't have as many rom-coms. We don't have as many of those middle-brow movies to pad out, you know, the running time landscape. So I think it's just because of where we're at with what goes to theaters that we're in this.
I'll answer in a couple ways. I agree with most of what you were saying. I think that for me, I'm talked more into a shorter movie than I am talked out of a longer movie, if that makes sense. Like, I will never say like, oh, that's 3 hours, I'm not going to watch it, or that's 2:45, I'm not going to watch it. But there's a lot of times where a movie I probably wouldn't have watched, if I see it's 85 minutes, I'll throw it on a night that's like 9:30 at night. I'm looking for something short to watch before I go to bed. I do think also partially a movie like 65 is more looked at as damaged goods because it's an hour and a half than if it were maybe an hour 50 or 210 or something like that. So I think that's almost kind of a perception thing where some people in Hollywood, and I'm completely speculating, think that in order for a movie to seem, you know, of a certain quality or a certain, you know, shine, that they need it to be a certain length.
Yeah, for me, I think the runtime is less important than the economy of the storytelling, right? So kind of along the lines of what you were saying, Rob, like if a movie can tell its story in a brief period of time, great. There are movies I've seen where I wanted more at the end, and I feel like that can be a failure too, right? If I didn't get as much, you know, character building or, you know, backstory that I felt like would have drawn me in more. But, you know, by the same token, like I just loved RRR. I watched that, you know, like a month ago or so. Amazing movie, 3 hours and 7 minutes. And look, I mean, I'll be honest, I postponed watching it till I felt like I had that much time to really dedicate to it. So that means I'm not watching it on an evening when I'm coming home from work tired, because I know I'm probably going to fall asleep and not like pay as much attention, right? But I still think there's a place for longer movies, just like there's a place for shorter movies. I just think it comes down to how well can you tell the story. And sometimes if you take away those longer run times, you have to get more creative in how you present the information. And I enjoy that aspect. But, you know, I think this is always going to be a battle. And even back in the 20s and even before that, there were movies that were 3 hours long, right?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
or whatever. So it's not going to go away. I think it's just, you have to just go to the movies that work for you. And honestly, there are so many movies of lots of different run lengths. I always sort by runtime when I'm on Letterboxd and like look at my watch list and see, okay, what do I have time for right now, right? And it can be a useful tool for me.
That's really smart.
I sometimes get excited when I see a movie that shouldn't have a really long runtime has a really long runtime. Like I remember when I saw like a week ahead of its release that Den of Thieves was like 2.5 hours. And I'm just like, how is Den of Thieves 2.5 hours? And then I'm just like praying that holds and it's not a typo. And then when it happens, I was like, oh, I get it now, because they want to be Redbox Heat. This is great. Right, so our next question comes from Brian. He took the mailbag super literally.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how much time we'll spend on this, Brian, but he basically asked, why do U.S. postal mailbags have such thin straps? I'm going to defer to you two to answer this one.
I tried to catch my mailman today to ask him about his bag, but I was unsuccessful. All I've got for this is that I used to work for UPS in college, and our bags were not that thin. That's all I got for you.
I don't really have an answer, but I will take this moment to shout out the game that I was obsessed with playing when I was young. And that was a game Stampin' Up, where you collected stamps throughout the game using like little cards. And I was obsessed with this game. I don't know if anybody else in the whole world has.
Was this like a tabletop game or like a video game?
It's a board game.
Oh,
it's a board game. Yeah. And it was so much fun. So I never actually like collected stamps. I know people that did, but I did love playing Stampin'. And so shout out to the USPS. They gave me that if they gave me nothing else.
All right, our next question comes from Chris. Was it better to be a movie fan 20 years ago when more movies were released in theaters, movie magazines were profitable, and Blockbuster and mom and pop video stores were everywhere, but it was still hard to find cult classics? Or is it better to be a movie fan now when very few movies make it to theaters? Movie journalism is mostly free online, but almost every movie is available to stream, and there are dozens of boutique DVD labels releasing the most obscure cult classics. For me, I'll say I think better back then for movies, and very briefly, I don't want to go into this because this is a movie discussion, but for music, it's better now, because I can't tell you how many times back in the day I liked a song, and if the DJ on the radio didn't say what the song was, I was tortured and trying to figure out what the song is. And now you can get anything on YouTube at any time that you want to listen to, or Shazam it. So that's been a godsend. For movies, I think that the change in time has made it great from an accessibility standpoint and convenience, but also it makes the movies a lot less sticky, because there's no room for them to have long legs, because like the cycles are gone. So it's like you had first run, then a movie would run to second run, then it would go to video, then it would go to cable, then it would go to regular TV or TBS or something like that, or network. And a movie kind of existed and had a year to be part of the pop culture conversation. Now some movies don't even get a full weekend. So.
There's no, I mean, I steal this line from you all the time, but there's no monoculture anymore. There is no one pop culture anymore. Like I teach students who not a single one of them listens to the same kind of music, watches the same TV shows, we even watch videos on the same platforms. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Some kids don't watch Some kids just watch Netflix, some kids just watch TikTok, some kids don't watch anything. So we know it's very, 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 very different now. And I do think that one of the major issues, one of the things I'm happy to see, and I've talked about this before, I'm encouraged to see a lot of Zoomers are getting into collecting again, which was really cool. It's really heartening to hear a lot of my students talk about like they're getting back into vinyl or they're getting into physical media and things like that. Because I do think that there will always be a certain subset of us who do things the way that we prefer to do them in that way in terms of the collection and how that reflects your personality and all that. But I do think there's an ownership quality of it that is still going to be there, but going to certainly be far less common than it was.
I think it's better for movies that aren't coming out now. I feel like there's so much more accessibility to whether it's, classic films that were not available for a really long time to see because you had to go to a repertory screening to see them. And now they're not only on, video, but they're also on streaming, like Criterion and other sources. Libraries have huge, Canopy has got an enormous library. So to me, like the accessibility of all those things, like from international and older movies, and like the person mentioned, the cult movies, is really great. But then you have the problem of stuff that's coming out now, like Adam said, being so disposable, right? And so unless it gets a specialty label like a Criterion or an Arrow release, then it's forgotten as long as you're not talking about it. And that's unfortunate. But I think it's worse to be a movie maker and a movie industry person than it is to be a movie fan right now. I think movie fans actually have it pretty good.
Yeah, I was thinking of the question also kind of in relation to, I do like 20th anniversary columns for movies. And like, I feel like I've lived, a time period with a lot of those movies, like something like SWAT, which is not, a blockbuster, one for the ages. Like, I feel like I have a really vivid memory of seeing SWAT and all this stuff. Whereas when I think back on movies from, say, like 2013 till now, there's not many that I go back to ever, or like there's not many I think about ever, or anything like that. And maybe it's like just everything is a long franchise now or something. But even like the movies that like meant a lot in that year seem less sticky than they used to. So I think that is kind of from a film history perspective, it's almost like this lost decade, which is really sad.
And we should note, obviously, like we know that somebody who was 10 years old in 2013 looks at 2013 a lot differently than we do. We understand that. We understand that part of it is a byproduct of getting older. Your tastes change. For me, my, movies don't stick as much as they did when I was 10 because I'm doing more movie watching. I'm watching more things. So obviously it's going to have a more transitory effect. But I do think that they're just the way that they're presented to us is different. And Rosalie, especially you as somebody who really goes after the classics, somebody who is really into golden age and even pre-code and stuff like that, because I always look at it from the perspective of you can have the internet, it can be there for you, you can have all the streaming titles in the world, but if nobody's there to show them to you, if nobody's there to introduce them to you, then are you likely to find them?
To be honest, it's actually kind of encouraging because as much as I have a love-hate relationship with social media, I feel like the classic film lovers are finding each other, and that is younger generations as well. Whether it's something they found out about through their parents, or whether there was a gateway film that really like struck them, or they read an interview with one of their filmmakers that they like that's contemporary that took them back, or they watched a Criterion Closet video, right? The ways that people are finding these things are different. But I think so I have this debate with people all the time of like, is it better now to like everything's at your fingertips, or was it better when you had to really dig for it?
Right.
I could see both sides, right? Does it mean more to you just because it was more work to find it? Maybe. But I still think that having so much more available to you, you're going to come across things, just stumble across things, and maybe something will catch your eye that you would never have heard of before.
And I'm sure, of course, that there were people having this exact conversation 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 60 years ago, and there will be 40 years in the future. So we were aware of that as well.
Quick one comes from Dave, our friend Dave. Since it's getting to March Madness, what is your favorite Shaq movie, also starring Nick Nolte, directed by William Friedkin? I feel like he's kind of leading us with that question.
Uh-huh.
I will defer to Patrick Bromley because he recently watched Blue Chips for the first time and texted me about how much he liked Blue Chips, which was not my experience with Blue Chips.
No.
They play the song "Baby Please Don't Go" in every scene, and it's annoying as all hell. I like some of the movie. I like where it lands. I remember a lot of it. I remember like the kid wanting $30,000 in a gym bag and him saying, "Get the hell out of here, Ricky." I remember the one kid, Tony, failed TV. I mean, like, I get it, but I'll say also or favorite Friedkin. There's so many. There's obvious ones. I would say I don't even know if it's underrated anymore, but To Live and Die in LA is like pretty amazing. So I'll go with that one.
Nice. I didn't make it through Blue Chips. Sorry, Dave. But I would say my favorite Friedkin is a toss-up between Killer Joe and Cruising. I really like Friedkin when he's at his like grimiest and prettiest and weirdest. And those are movies that, really stand out to me. I do need to watch Sorcerer. I have not watched that, and I'm sure I would love it. But
it's obvious at this point. It's not even underrated one anymore, but this is mine.
Yeah, Sorcerer is pretty awesome. I saw Sorcerer at the first Chicago Critics Film Fest, and he was there in person and did a Q&A, and it was pretty amazing. I'll tell you a funny story off camera about it. One more comes from Louie, our friend Louie. In the spirit of hashtag #FThisMovieFest, hashtag Junesploitation, and hashtag Scary Movie Month, is there a festival/movie month you would like to create and have it be an annual thing? So Rosalie, we'll start with you.
Okay. Well, I can't say that I came up with anything super clever here, although I was trying to, but I'll talk about something that I already sort of do. And that is Martial Arts Mondays. So my partner Andy loves martial arts films, and I wasn't very familiar with them. And so we started this a few years ago, and we don't do it all the time, but I've gotten through quite a few Jackie Chans that way, and some Bruce Lee, and some, more obscure stuff. And it's been a really fun way to discover movies that I otherwise would not have seen. And some of them are really bad, and some of them are really, really good. And so, Martial Arts Mondays, I highly encourage everybody to try it out.
I guess for me, I would never, I'll answer it kind of two ways. One is I like not knowing everything. So I love Patrick's curation of stuff. I would never want to influence his curation of stuff because that takes away the enjoyment of it for me, of being the recipient of it. And like I don't want to tell him what to book for This Movie Fest or yada yada yada. So I want some of that as a surprise for me. So I would never want this to become like a piece of the This Movie calendar. But I will say secretly behind the curtain, sci-fi February has kind of become a thing for me because of the February sci-fi fantasy fuck up episode, because Rob and I usually do like Highlander month or VR month or something like that. It's when I'm most prone to wanting to watch sci-fi fantasy schlock. And I for one have noticed in my older age, I prefer that to high-minded good sci-fi. So that's something that I dip into quite a bit in February. Well, thank you, Rosalie, for joining us. It was
Rosalie,
a blast as always.
Thank you.
And Rob, you and I will be back next week with special guest Mark on, and we're doing something new. It's called The Same Title Showdown, and it's Gladiator 1992, directed by Rowdy Harrington, versus Gladiator 2000, directed by Ridley Scott. So until next time.
Mark on, mark off. These seats are reserved. Bye.
It's funny because some of it too is just like I'll think of a pun and then I'll reverse engineer a thing because of it. So Rosalie, you'll appreciate this. When we were watching Wild Things at Smash Cut on Saturday, when they played Why Can't We Be Friends by Smash Mouth, I thought Smash Month, and Smash Month would be at reserved seating, where it would be the criteria is you have to pick a song where Smash, or you have to pick a movie where Smash Mouth is on the soundtrack. And
I love
looked
it.
up, and they're on like 78 movies and TV shows. So I'm like, okay, there's a
man.
good pool here. So